Hello and welcome to VEDA 14. I feel like for some reason, is it the 14th? I don't know. I think that I heard in class that it was the 14th, but for some reason it doesn't seem, I feel like I skipped 11, 12, and 13, but I don't know why. Anyway, so this morning I read an article, an online article that was in the New Yorker. I sound so educated, but I actually saw that article because I was scrolling on Tumblr. I don't regularly read the New Yorker, although if I had to subscribe, if I had the money and I had to subscribe to one magazine, it probably would be the New Yorker. Because I'm already subscribed to Sunset, which is also a great magazine, and you should totally check it out if you like food and travel and gardening. But anyway, the article is about basically reading old things, like old texts that at the time that they were written, they probably weren't thought of as offensive, but now through a more modern perspective, they are clearly very offensive. And it was about how to reconcile your love for those kinds of literature, but while still being aware that there's something wrong and that you should be critical about it. So I was very interested in the topic, and I read through the whole article, but I still came out kind of meh. Like, I wasn't very satisfied with what the person concluded. It was basically, they talked about how there was one play recently that used one of those pieces of literature as its basis, and while it remained very faithful to its source material, it at the same time was critical towards it. It was kind of like they would have certain lines that were right from the source material, and somehow, at least the writer thought that in those single lines, it had like a double entendre, a double meaning of where the audience could understand and laugh at the offensivity of it, I suppose. Or maybe the offensiveness. I don't know if offensivity is a word. But so they could, in some ways, they would get that it was a bad thing to say, but then they would also get it in the context of the play. I don't remember. But I'll put a link to the article. But yeah, I was just overall not very impressed with the article. And it made me think. Because as some of you guys may know, I'm a medieval minor now. And I've read a lot of medieval things, and I really like medieval things. And in most of the ancient stuff that I have to read, I wouldn't say that anything is explicitly wrong, but I mean, there's definitely room for like a feminist critique of the Iliad, right? Because like, why does Helen start the whole war? Why is Helen to blame when Paris is the one who took her away? Or like, I don't know, Andromache suffers. I don't know. Clearly, when I'm talking about this, I have a hard time with it too, because I really like these texts. So maybe a different example that I could use is like the King Arthur story. So obviously I love Arthur, but at the same time, it's all about Arthur and his knights. And even though the enemy in the King Arthur myth and the guy who kills Arthur is his son, it's very significant that the way that his son like was procured was because of his like devious sister, and like she's a witch and all this stuff. So where am I trying to go with this? I really don't know. Yeah, I just think it's an interesting question, and a question that we kind of acknowledge in the humanities, but we never actually like dedicate a class to it. Is that how can you reconcile? I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm a bad feminist because I like these ancient things, and I think that like literature, like Greek literature especially, is very interesting because on the one hand, if you're looking at it at least from a feminist perspective, I can't really do anything like a racial perspective thing. I haven't thought about that as much with Greek. But if you're doing kind of a feminist critique, then it would be interesting to note that in ancient Greece, in that society, like we have evidence of it being very patriarchal and women like staying within the household and all this stuff that feminists nowadays hate. But at the same time, if you look at all their literature, like Hera is really powerful. Artemis just kills any guy who gets near her. Like Athena especially. Athena, when she's being introduced in most of the mythology that we have left, it's like they describe Athena as being exactly like she's just as powerful as Zeus. She's just as smart as Zeus. But for some reason, like she never tries to overthrow Zeus or whatever. Like Athena is the only god who can pick up Zeus's thunderbolt and throw it down at people, like she does in the Aeneid. So it's weird. It's weird to me that a society that was known, or that we know to have like put women down, could think up such interesting and really cool female characters. And like the characters in those stories, I think, are a lot cooler than a lot of the female characters that we have now. And I talked a little bit about this in Sunday's video about, like, if you read the Oresteia, which is a 3-part play series, the woman character there, Clytemnestra, is really cool because she's so, like, non-gender conforming. And it really doesn't reflect any of the Athenian social values that existed at the time. So, yeah, in one way, I'm kind of skeptical of people critiquing these in a feminist way because I feel like at the time these plays and works were like going against those social norms. But I can see that, well, like, they might be cool, but a lot of times the really powerful women are made out to be villains. So obviously, like, you could interpret the plays as being a critique of women who try to step out of their social role. But yeah, I don't know. That's not the way that I interpret those kinds of stories, as solely just a critique of women. But I think that sometimes, like, I am a naive person for not going that far. Yeah, and then there's the whole thing of like I love Huckleberry Finn too. And Huckleberry Finn at the time was a really progressive novel, and I think it still is a progressive novel. But of course there's that critique of the whole thing, like, well, even though it was a progressive novel, why did Mark Twain have to use the N-word like that, all this stuff. And there are some people that are really passionate about that kind of thing, and they will never forgive, like, an author. Even though at the time you were really progressive, to our standards, you're still not progressive, so we can't forgive you. And I think that's kind of weird to me, but I mean, I can kind of see how that kind of way of thinking is important. But yeah, I personally have never been able to really critique a piece of work like that outside of its context. And now that I just think about it, I guess that's a very formalist way of reading books. Yeah. So, I don't know. This looks like it's getting really long, so I'm going to stop because I don't really have a point. I just wanted to know if anyone else had thoughts on kind of trying to read within... I don't know. Do you think that makes sense to read books in our context? Or is it better to read them in the context in which they were written? I mean, probably a combination of both, but, you know... Like, synthesizing those kinds of readings and those kinds of schools of thought are very difficult, I think. So that's what humanities majors do. Okay, yeah. This is getting really long, and I don't want to hit 10 minutes. So that's it. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Tell me what you think about this really horrible conundrum thing. Bye.